This is a tool I use to cut balsa wood with, and in this video I'm gonna show you how I made it. You can obviously use a knife and a ruler instead, but it's very difficult to get a straight cut down through the wood because your hands and the blade will wobble a bit, especially if you're using one of these scalpel blades. Also, it's quite tedious and slow to measure out the cut and keeping the ruler straight and in place while you're cutting the wood. Using a tool like this makes it easier and a lot faster. You don't actually have to make one yourself, you can buy or 3D print one, but the ones I found could only fit small blades, cut thin materials, weren't very adjustable, or just looked flimsy, which is why I decided to make one myself. Now this definitely isn't perfect, and I'll go over some of the problems throughout the video. For this project I needed some wood, some knife blades, a couple of bolts, and some wing nuts. I also used a single washer, but you might need a couple more. This piece of wood was just something I had lying around, but the thickness was just about right, so I thought I'd use that. It's 16 millimeters thick, and it just had to be thicker than the balsa wood that I want to cut, which is about 8 millimeters. I cut off the sides and then I cut some square sticks out of the wood. Sadly, I don't have a lot of woodworking tools. In hindsight, I should have just bought some square sticks, because it turned out to be really difficult to get them flat and square. So whenever possible, I tried to use the sides that I didn't cut myself. First, I made the part that would hold the blade. I cut two 7 centimeters lengths of wood that were around 1 centimeter thick, so the 3 centimeter bolt could pass through both of them. And then I drilled the holes for the bolts. Next, I made the sliding mechanism. I cut 2 lengths at about 10 centimeters and 2 small square pieces that were just a hair thicker than the diameter of the bolts, which was around 5 millimeters. I glued the pieces together using PVA glue with the smaller bits sandwiched between the longer bits of wood, which created a slot for the bolt, allowing this part to slide back and forth or be locked into place. Next, it was time to put the two parts together. I aligned one half of the clamping mechanism to the slider and marked out where to drill the holes. Luckily, I had made enough space for the slider to fit between the heads of the bolts. I countersunk the holes so the screws wouldn't prevent the clamping mechanism from closing, but I didn't do a good enough job of it, so unfortunately I split the wood. Luckily it was pretty clean, so I could just glue them back together again. I decided to use some other screws, and I used a drill to counterbore the holes so it wouldn't happen again. Luckily that worked out fine, and the two parts fit nicely together. To create the base, I took the remaining piece of wood and I drilled a hole wide enough for a bolt to fit through. Then I took a bigger drill and I counterbored that hole. I had to drill quite deep because the bolt wasn't long enough to reach through 2 layers of wood plus a washer, and also for the wing nut to have something to grab onto on the other side. I shortened the base off camera. To make sure the slider wouldn't slip, I wanted to install some guide rails. So I cut up 2 lengths of wood and then I glued them in place on each side of the slider. Then I marked out a gauge on top of the cutter to measure out the width of the cut. And finally, I want to tell you the 2 things I would change about this design if I had to do it over again. Firstly, I would have made the 2 pieces of wood that hold the blade in place a bit taller so the back of the blade isn't protruding. It's not sharp, but there's still a chance that I might have an accident with it. Secondly, I would have made the base a little bit longer, because when I'm starting a new cut, the area of contact between the cutter and the board I'm cutting is quite small. So the cutter can wobble a bit, which ruins the cut and every cut after that. And I think if I made it longer, that might prevent it from happening. I hope this video was useful. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.